Thanks for tuning in to My Valley, His Victory, hosted by me, McKenzie Smith, where I interview Christians who love the outdoors and have walked through valleys in their lives. In a world of highlight reels and surface-level relationships, we all have faced hardships. I believe our experiences can be encouraging to others if we have the courage to be vulnerable. 2 Corinthians 1 says, "The Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God." My goal is to inspire you to come to the Creator through His creation and connect you with Christians who have been through similar experiences. I pray that this podcast encourages you if you are in a valley and pushes you to share how God has turned your past valley into His victory. This episode is brought to you by Highlander USA. Highlander USA is the adventure of a lifetime. It is a hiking event held in Big Bear, California, June 17th through 21st, with formats from 1 day to 5 days. If you're interested in hiking or backpacking and being around those who love the outdoors, look no further than Highlander. Use code KENZIE20 for 20% off your registration. I hope to see you there. On today's episode of My Valley, His Victory, we have Chris Cameron. He is a dedicated naturalist, consultant, and educator who helps individuals discover their connection to the natural world. As a licensed master falconer and avid birder, he enjoys introducing others to the wonders of wildlife, such as locating elusive short-eared owls. With a background in science and a degree in theology, Chris fosters engaging conversations that embrace diverse perspectives. Over his career, he has guided thousands of children on nature adventures and rekindled a passion for the environment in countless adults. Beyond his professional endeavors, Chris cherishes his role as Pop Nature and delights in spending time with his grandson, Theo. Thanks so much for being with us today, Chris.
My pleasure to be with you.
Yes. So I know I just read your bio, but why don't you go ahead and just share a little bit more about yourself and who you are?
You know what was funny when I listening to that? It's always funny to hear someone read your bio. But what I'm doing lately is I'm spending a lot of time in nature with old folks, with retired people. And while I've spent a lifetime working with kids and teenagers, working with people older than myself is really fun. They're really intelligent and they love being out there just like the kids.
Yeah. So kind of talk to us what you're doing with them and kind of how you got into that.
Right. My retirement gig is I've been retired for about 6 years, and somebody called and said, "Hey, can you lead a group of seniors in Yosemite?" And I said, "Sure, be happy to." So I did that for about 3 weeks a few years back. And then I said, "Hey, I really enjoyed that. That was fun. Do you have any more? What would you?" And then they sent me a schedule of 28 weeks. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a job. I don't want a job. I just retired. But I did grab a handful of weeks in both Yosemite, Sequoia, and Kings Canyon. And I take seniors out to enjoy nature.
Yeah. Is it mostly bird watching or what kind of, what do you take them out to do?
Yeah, just so people sign up to, when you get old, you have this concept of bucket list. You know, I want to see a few things before I die. And the older you get, the closer that bucket comes. And so they say, "Oh, I want to see Yosemite. I heard that's the best place. I've got to see that." Or the big trees in Sequoia, or the deepest canyon at Kings Canyon. I've got to go see that. So it's fun because when we're on the bus and going to those places, I say, "Why did you come?" Because it's a bucket list. What does that mean? And they said, "Well, we got to see this before we kick the bucket." And I said, so how do you really expect this to change your life? This is a vacation and you're going to see these things. So what is it going to change in your life? And so we get to see the beautiful trees and the beautiful mountains. And I do all the natural history and teach them all of those things, the geology and forestry and all those subjects. But then I try to talk about meaning of life issues, because the meaning of life is getting closer and closer for them as they come to the end. So, you know, if you have 100 years here and you are right here on the dot where you're like 80 years old, that whole line, this part we're not going to talk about, it's just this part here.
Yeah.
And so we get to have good discussions. And I do have a background as a pastor too. So I was a pastor for many years. So I get to weave in important thoughts about God and meaning of life. So it's really good, really fun.
Yeah. What a interesting kind of culmination of a couple of things. Your people are there and they're thinking about the end of their life because they want to see all these things, but you get to bring in this other perspective of like, hey, let's talk about something a little bit deeper here.
Right.
And they may be, I don't know, in your experience, are they more receptive or less receptive to that conversation because that is a thought, like I am going to die, in the next.
They are wildly receptive. So it's really fun because not only do we get to talk about the incredible, beautiful nature things, but I say, John Muir considered this a temple, and here we are, cathedral spires. What's a cathedral? And we get to see all these lovely places. And so what does it matter if you collect all the stickers from all the national parks? How does that make your life better? A lot of them have the passport books, and they want to get that sticker at the passport. But what if you fill that whole book up? Is that it? Did you win? Or is there something else to it? And so at meal times, we get off the natural history subject and talk about meaning of life, and they're very, very open to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. What a special opportunity you have there in those parks and with those people.
It's probably the most fun I've had in my whole career but like you said, it's this crush of things together. So I had, when I was in college, I was studying science, and then I felt like, no, I better go into ministry. So I dropped out of my science world and went into ministry, got my degree in theology, and worked in churches for about 15 years. And then, due to one of those terrible church splits, things that happen, I found myself looking for another job. So I got a job with the school system teaching nature to kids. And so then I started working for the California Department of Education, providing environmental education resources for teachers. And then I took on the directorship of a camp where I started environmental education programs for kids. So now I did that for, 17 years or something. And so now that I'm retired, I get to mix these two loves, and they've always been my loves, a love of God and a love of nature. And those two loves, when they get mixed together, you're at your happiest place. And so that's where I'm at right now. So
yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you just covered that, because that was going to be my next question was, it sounds like you were a pastor and you went to school for that. And so how did this, love for nature kind of come about? And you kind of just explained it to us without me even asking. So
yeah.
Is the outdoors, you said you wanted to go to school for science and that sort of thing. Is that something that you've always had a passion and a love for? Were you, always in the outdoors growing up? Kind of talk to us about where that love and desire came from.
Yeah, I grew up in the city in LA, and we would go on vacation to Yosemite. And so I have pictures of me in Yosemite before I was 1 year old, being dipped in the Merced River, the River of Mercy, right? So I've been dipped in the river early on, and always loved the trees, always loved the mountains, always loved that river. And so we were there every summer. And I remember being home. I was probably, 4 or 5 years old, and I was digging in a garden because I was trying to look for where the dirt in, because my whole life was concrete and asphalt. And my mom said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I know they have to bring the dirt in from someplace like Yosemite. I know there's dirt out there, but there's not any dirt here." So it's funny because I grew up as a city kid with a deep, deep love of nature. And that just continued.
Yeah. Is most of your love for nature or just where you have been in California, or are you someone, kind of like the people that you lead that have been all over the country or all over the world traveling?
Yeah, I have traveled. I've hiked around in Australia and all through Europe. I've been in Africa and China. So I've been around in different places in the world, but obviously California is the best place. There's no question, and the Sierra is the best of the best. And so when I was a kid, I went hiking with my cousins, and we hiked in the mountains, and we, as soon as you get away from your parents, about 12 or 13, you start getting this little independent streak. And so my cousins and I would go backpacking in the mountains, and we hiked the John Muir Trail when I was, I think I was 16 years old in like 1976 or something. And it was just the two of us, my cousin and I, just hiking along down the trail, and just couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this on our intro call, and I was like, yeah, I hiked the John Muir Trail last year, because we were talking about your experience in Kings Canyon and Sequoia and Yosemite. And I said, I've been to Yosemite a couple of times, but I've only been to Kings Canyon and Sequoia through the John Muir Trail. And you go, yeah, I did that in 1976 or whatever. And I was like, that's crazy. I cannot imagine. I've only started backpacking in the last 5 years, and things have obviously changed so much. I even went to the thrift store, and I have it to hang in my office at some point, but one of those big framed backpacks, and I'm just I can't even wrap my brain around, the gear back then. And then I guess my question for you, and it's not even related to this podcast, but how did you guys resupply food, or did you just carry everything you needed for the whole entire John Muir Trail?
I can only carry about 12 or 13 days worth of food. So we did have to resupply. But back then, there wasn't a freeze-dried food business.
Nope.
There was no Mountain House sort of stuff. And if they did have some, it was really terrible. It was so bad. So we brought in canned food. Canned food,
Yeah.
and, a top ramen or dried rice or instant mashed potatoes. For breakfast, we would have instant breakfast. There was a powdered instant breakfast that we would mix with powdered milk, and we'd just drink that. So yeah, we just carried a lot, and we did have a stop because that was a long hike. So we dropped food at Red's Meadow,
Okay.
Devil's Postpile area.
Okay. Very cool. That's I would love to go back in time and just see what it was like, because I think about all the gear now and how small it is and how, compact, and just the technology, obviously that has changed, and just to see all of that in action, I think would be really fun.
Yeah, it was a bit heavier.
Yeah, you guys were a lot stronger back then.
It was heavier stuff.
We're weak now. We need ultralight backpacks and things.
Right when I finished the John Muir Trail, I thought, well, I've heard this thing. They're trying to get this thing called the Pacific Crest Trail together.
Oh.
And so they didn't have any continuous maps, so you had to patch it together yourself. But I had a friend do it in 1977.
Okay.
And I had all the maps and everything ready to go, trying to figure out food drops and how I was going to do it. But I never did it. But, I'm not dead yet, so who knows? Might still be in the future.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, thank you for taking us down that journey, because I think that's super fun. And to think about, this was a brand new thing, doing long distance trails like the Pacific Crest Trail.
Right.
When you were growing up, that was new, and that was, you were having to piece it together even still at that point. That's crazy to me.
Right. And now, I look at podcasts like or YouTube's like Dixie,
mm-hmm.
who's done the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail, and all over the place. It's just amazing.
Yeah. It's a whole movement now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Oh, well, Chris, I would love for you to share with us. You've talked to us a little bit about your love for the outdoors, and you've talked to us a little bit about your love for theology and for Christianity. But I would love for you to talk to us about kind of how these two things come together and how the outdoors plays a role specifically in your relationship with Christ.
Yeah, and I've actually been thinking about that for this reason. And, I was in the church world for a long time, and I was pastor to teens, and I worked at this church. It was, 13 years or 12 or 13 years. And then after this crunchy church split, my last thing was to take a group of teenagers. I was training these teenagers to work with kids. And so I took them on a backpack trip. And so we're up on the backpack trip 2 or 3 days after I got fired, but I was required to stay on for another couple of weeks. It was really, really ugly, messy stuff. So I was taking them on the backpack trip, and I sent them up the trail ahead of me. And I was looking at this incredible view of the Sierra. And I just sat down because I was by myself, and I started crying. And because I thought I would be in the church work my whole life. And now my life was being turned upside down. And the thing that came to me was this verse in Psalm 121. It says, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from you, Lord, maker of the heavens and creator of the earth. And talks about he'll protect you in the sun and in the moon and all that. And that just gripped me. That's probably one of the lowest points, being fired from a church. It's a weird situation. And so there was this mix of God and nature right there. I'm in the mountains leading a group of teens on a training hike so they could do ministry to children. And I'm hurting, and I'm calling out to God because I'm in the mountains. And remember that verse, Psalm 121. I remember that as just a really pivotal time of where does my help come from? Does it come from my bank account? Does it come from my education? Does it come from my background or personality? No, my help comes from you, Lord, maker of the heavens and creator of the earth. And that's just always stuck with me as, you can sour on different things. Like you can sour on the church, or you can sour on family, or you can sour on this and that. But there's this eternal presence of God that is there to lift you up and hold you. Another time that I remember being really in a hard time was when my son, he had been an alcoholic for a long time. And alcoholism is such a tricky thing. It just grabs you by the foot and tears you down and takes you in this vortex,
Yeah.
And you can't give advice to someone who's not looking for advice, From the outside, you can say, oh, if you did this, this, and this, your life would be better. But nobody's really interested in that. They have to be ready for that.
Yeah.
And so I remember just going to my son and giving him a great big hug and saying, I will always love you. And you don't have to stop drinking for me to love you. I will always love you. And if you continue on this direction, you're going to die. And I will be really, really sad, give you the best funeral I can, and it will wreck my life. But I will never stop loving you. And you don't have to change for me to love you. I love you now, and I will always love you. And that just comes from what Jesus has given us, says we love him because he first loved us. And his love for us is really an unconditional love. There's a verse in Jeremiah 31 that says, I will love you with an everlasting love. And that love of God, if you take it in and experience it, then you can give it out.
Yeah.
And when you give it out, not requiring people to be different, but what's that verse that says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, right?
Yep.
He didn't die for us after we were fixed, but while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so if God loves us with that kind of love, and we can give that love to other people, that makes a difference in this world. So There you go. There's a couple thoughts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those, and for even just the scriptural kind of backing that goes with it. And I think to go back to your first story, what a great verse to come to mind, whenever you're standing there in the mountains and you look up and it's like exactly the answer that you needed, without even knowing that you needed it. But it was like, and what an odd, I can't even begin to wrap my mind around that, being, let go from a job, but yet still having to fulfill a part of that job, and having all of those emotions while having to, be pouring into the young people as well. That's kind of seems to be a wild experience, and probably took a lot of strength and courage to even go and show up and be there. And so for God to meet you there and to remind you of that verse, and to kind of start, thinking about some of those things, like maybe my help was coming from my title. It was ministry, yes, but maybe it was this title, or your bank account, like you said, and all of those things. And so what a good thing to just focus on and meditate on in that time and really lean into God.
Yeah.
And then, secondly, the story with your son, man, what a special moment. I'm sure he will never forget that moment.
He has been sober for 7 years. And just a couple of days ago, we were hiking in the White Mountains on the other side of the Sierra. And to hike with my adult sons, who are now men, and hike in the ancient bristlecone forest, and then go, search out some warm hot springs in the Kern River, and to be with my boys, who are not boys, they're men, was really incredible. And to know that they're both alive and well and still following God, and now following God, is a great thing.
Yeah. But I think you are right. We on the outside can know all the right things, or we can, have all the good ideas of like, this is what you could do, and so on and so forth. But you're so right. In any addiction, like, until that person is ready to make a change, it doesn't matter how good the advice is. It doesn't matter how good the rehab is. It doesn't matter how good whatever they go to is. Like, it has to be a personal decision that they're like, no, I want to change. I'm not changing. Because anytime you change for somebody else or for something else, like, chances are it's gonna that motivation is going to dwindle at some point.
Yeah.
And I think that's, exactly, sometimes what people need in that is just, I love you no matter what. I think that's one of our deepest needs, is to feel loved, and to feel loved unconditionally, and not, and, I think that's why, God knows exactly what we want, and that's why he loves us that way. But to see that in the flesh, too, from someone like your father, I think is so valuable. And I know he'll never forget that moment, and that probably was very helpful in that time, versus having a dad who was like, you need to get it together, and here's all the things you need to do. And, just kind of trying to do it for them.
Right.
So thank you so much for sharing those. So where in California do you live now?
I live on the Central Coast, and in the San Luis Obispo County, in a little town called Los Osos, next to Montaña de Oro State Park.
Okay, very cool. So wouldn't really call that an urban environment, but I know that you did live in LA at one point. So I always like to ask our guests for a practical piece of advice that people can start connecting with God on an everyday basis through his creation while being in a more urban environment. Because, we can't always be in Yosemite National Park or in Sequoia National Park. And so what are some little ways that we can kind of bring these two things together on an everyday basis?
Well, there's a couple of apps that are really good. The Seek app or the Merlin Bird ID app. And those are both free apps. And you can go to your local park, and even in the most concrete jungle city, there's a piece of green someplace, and there are birds flying someplace, and you can press that Merlin Bird ID app and listen to the birds singing, and it says, oh, this is a such and such, and you can start IDing birds even in the city, birds by ear, birds by sight. In fact, there's a guy, the urban birder in England, who focuses on Lindo is his name, focuses on urban birding. So there's birds in the city and there's green in the city. And when you see something green and you hold up the Seek app, it'll help you understand what that plant is. And then you can get a little more background, and you can find out the tough city birds and the tough city plants. And there's nature in the most urban jungle. So take a walk. It's obviously, you got to get out. It's not going to happen inside the walls. You got to get out. And once you get out, there are tenacious weeds that are living in the cracks of the pavement. If you drive on the 405, there are weeds growing in the median of the 405 freeway. So there's nature all around you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I had never heard about this Merlin bird app until a guest recently, she's also a naturalist, shared about it. And then my friend, I just went on a backpacking trip in the desert, and she had it on her phone, and we kept hearing this bird at our camp. And I don't remember what she thought it was, but I said, I kind of think it's an owl. Like, it was this weird, it sounded like a bird, but it had this tiny, like, it sounded like a hoot. Like, it just had that feel to it. I was like, I think that's an owl. Keep in mind, I know zero about birds. Like, absolutely nothing. And so she got out her phone and she played it. And I was like, totally expecting it not to work, especially because it was like kind of far away. Like we kind of had to like wait to hear it. And it was very much in the distance. And nope, it was very much like a spotted something owl.
Wow.
And I was like, and it worked without service. Like, we didn't have cell phone service. And I was like, this is actually really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was highly impressed.
It's quite amazing. And I see these little memes or something where a lady says, I used to be young and cool and hip. And now I'm saying, is that a Audubon's warbler out the window? So this bird watching thing comes up and grabs you. And there's a certain stage in life where it's like, it's kind of along the sourdough lines. All of a sudden you're making sourdough bread and watching birds, and you said, I have become my grandmother. What's happening?
I love that. It comes about the same time you start making sourdough. Oh man, that means my husband's going to start being a birder here soon, because he's
very, very close.
He hasn't started the sourdough train yet, but he's very much interested in collecting all the things to do it. So,
okay. Well, has he started on the kombucha train yet?
No, I don't think he'll ever do that because he doesn't like kombucha.
Oh, okay. Well,
so
because that's where that train heads.
I know. I have a friend. She's she's on that train. That's funny.
The kefir train.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that surprised me, my friend was saying about the Merlin bird app, was there's a bird, some sort of like mockingbird, where it makes the sounds of other birds,
right.
It copies them.
Right.
And the app can still tell you, even though it sounds exactly like another bird, that
right.
it is whatever the bird is. And I was like, that's nuts.
Right. Yeah, I helped run the Morro Bay Bird Festival for many years. It's on Martin Luther King weekend every year in Morro Bay. Thousands of people come to it. And I went out, since I'm one of the leaders, I went out to check on one of the trips, and it was a birding by ear trip. And the guy said, okay, what is that you hear? And I watched the people try to identify it. But as a falconer, I knew what it was. It sounded just like a red-shouldered hawk, but it wasn't. It was a scrub jay imitating, or it was a Steller's jay imitating a red-shouldered hawk.
Yeah.
And you can hear just a tiny little bit off, but everybody identified it as a red-shouldered hawk. And I said, no, it's not. And then it flew out, and they can see the jay flying out of the tree, because he was a great mimic.
That's crazy. The more you know. Oh, man. Well, Chris, switching gears a little bit into the title of this podcast, My Valley, His Victory, would love for you to share with us a valley or a season of wilderness that you experienced, and just what God maybe taught you or prepared you for in that season.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing was after I got fired from the church, after I was not working the church job. That was a real question of identity, because I thought that's who I thought I was. And when that was taken away, it's like, oh my gosh, who am I now? What is my life all about? Where I'm going? What am I doing? And I had a wife and 3 kids, so how am I going to keep the family alive? So there were the financial panic, and then there's the identity question. And those things were really, really hard. And when the identity question was connected with the church, then there's that possibility of getting things crossed up, and so that was a really, really hard time. And I had to drive past that church whenever I left the town. So every time I passed it, there was this grief. And, it grief, when you lose something, whether it's a loved one or a job or an identity or a pet, it takes some time. It's not just an automatically, well, time to move on to the next thing. There's a process and a period of grief that happens. And so I took a job as a naturalist, teaching kids about nature. And that was really healing. And then it was dangerous when we went to other churches, because all the other churches knew my work at one church, and they looked at me like, "Oh, can you work here? Can you work here?" So I felt like I was on the meat market, and so trying to hold my connection with God in that time was a bit of a challenge. And so it was a connection with God, not so much with the connection of the people of the church or the friends from church, but it was just an individual connection with God that comes from scripture and prayer and from being outdoors. Those were the things that helped me get through.
Yeah.
So that was probably the toughest valley.
Yeah. Would love for you to share just maybe a little bit more. You said you walked into some of these churches and they wanted you to work there, but you took a job as a naturalist. What made you pivot to that versus going to work at another church?
Yeah, I had other offers of other church things, but you get sour. It's kind of like I just wanted a little break from that, because it was just emotionally really difficult, and the difficulty came with my identity of who I am and who I've been. For most of my life, I've been a pastor, and now I'm not a pastor. Do I want to jump back in and be a pastor again, or do I want to still work? The thing about the churches is they're made up of all these humans, and all these humans are just normal humans, and it doesn't matter how cool the church is, it's just still people. And so there's messiness in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just needed a little break, and the break in nature, teaching kids about nature. Oh my gosh, just the best thing. I just really loved it. So anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
Didn't quite answer your question, but
no, that's okay. Yeah, I think you said you needed a break and you needed some time and you got a little sour, and I think that totally makes sense. What age of kids were you teaching when you transitioned?
it was, have you done that 5th or 6th grade science camp? So I was one of those naturalists who taught the science camp. So the school would bring their 5th or 6th graders, and we'd teach them nature stuff.
Okay.
And I did that for 4 or 5 years and maybe more. And then as I continued to grow in that area, then I worked for the California Department of Education, providing those sorts of environmental education resources for thousands and thousands of teachers in a region. So I helped develop a statewide network of environmental education research resources to help teachers.
Okay. And was the naturalist thing or that certification or degree, I'm not quite sure what it was, is that something that you had previously, or you had to go back to school after being a pastor to get that? Or were you able to just like walk into that job?
Yeah, I walked into it. I had enough science that I was qualified, enough science and enough life experience to walk into that job. And now I teach the California Naturalist course. It's a University of California course. So I teach that course. I've probably taught over 20 of those. In fact, one of your previous guests, Jonathan, was in a California Naturalist course. So I teach a UC course on how to become a naturalist. So I have enough background to do that.
Okay, cool. I just wasn't sure if it was like, because I know you had said whenever you were in college, you made that transition to go to seminary, consider that path. But I didn't know how far you got down that road, right, and where that all ended up. And right, so I was just curious. But yes, Jonathan was the one who recommended you to be here. Yeah. And so, yes, you guys connected at that. And that is so fun that you guys are both out in California teaching people about the outdoors. I love that. Yeah. Super special. I want to ask you kind of an interesting question about a point that you made whenever you were sharing this story, was that anytime you would leave town, you would have to drive past this church.
Yeah.
And so I would love to just ask you kind of what or how you think having that, point or thing still be a visual in your life either helped you heal, or maybe the opposite. Maybe it took you longer to heal from that. Because I think so often whenever we are hurt by something, someone, a situation, a place, we very much just like cut it out. We do our best to avoid it. And I would like to assume that, there's actually probably some healing that happens in having to, drive by and remember and kind of work through some of those emotions. I don't know for sure that's the case, but would love to just kind of ask you what your thoughts were about having that be a place that you had to frequently go past.
Yeah. Daily, daily for years. I think it prolonged the grief, and made it more difficult to heal. I think if you had a really terrible breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and then that person was in your life every day at work, and like they were your boss, or you had to work with them for years after, it doesn't help you get over it quickly. And so I think having to drive past that church a couple times a day made the grief last longer. But I didn't really have anybody helping me through that grief either, so I probably could have benefited from some counseling there. But yeah, it was a very difficult time. That was really hard.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's just like that constant reminder. But I think, sometimes there's also, you could swing the opposite direction and just never think about it and never deal with it. And then it could boil up and, be a totally different situation if you don't ever have to address that place or those feelings. Right. And so it may have taken longer, but at least, maybe you worked through it versus just like ignoring it,
Yeah, perhaps.
I don't know. It's just the thought that came into my mind because, I think so often we don't want to see it. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to be a part of it. And so as you mentioned that, it just made me think like, how did that impact this process?
Yeah, I think if I had the option of not ever going there again, I would have taken that option. But that's the way out of town, and that's how I had to drive.
Hey, it happens. Oh, so I would love to just, ask you, I always like to leave our listeners with a piece of encouragement or a word of hope. If someone is going through a similar season, they've lost, their financial means, they've lost their identity, they've lost their church, which, could also be their family.
Yeah.
Kind of just give us some encouragement, give us some hope.
Yeah. I think that verse I said, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from God, you, God, maker of heaven and creator of the earth. I think time outside is good. I think leaning into the fact that we have a God who loves us unconditionally, and we don't have to get fixed before we can experience the love of God. I think that's really, really important. And then if we can accept that experience, then we have opportunity to give that to other people. So I think those things, in what is it? 1 Corinthians 13, it talks about love. Love never fails. Love always trusts. Love always protects. And that's the God that we have. And then one other concept I'd like to share is, if I was a creator and made a pot, a beautiful ceramic pot, and I gave it to you, Kinsey, as a gift, and I said, here's this thing. It took me a long, long time, and I made this beautiful thing for you. Then your most respectful response to me would be to take care of that, to put it in a place of honor, and to treat it nicely and treat it well. If you just used it as a doorstop or something, that wouldn't be the most respectful way to treat a gift I gave you. And so God has given us this earth, and here we are on this place that's got, incredible sadness and destruction, but it's also got incredible beauty. And the closer you look, the deeper you look, the more you can see the beauty that God created for us to enjoy. And so our normal response should be an open arm embrace and love and welcome of the beauty that surrounds us. And it's even in the people, if you can look close and look past some rough edges, there's beauty all around us. So an embrace of those things, I think, is important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's really helpful. And we do need to not take it for granted, because it is such a beautiful gift that he made for us. And so we need to embrace it, and we need to experience it, and not just shut ourselves in our houses with our technology. Mm-hmm. We got to get outside to see his creation and to see other people too. So right. Totally makes sense. Well, Chris, I thank you so much just for coming on here and for sharing a little bit about you and about your story and all the things. I would love for you to share with our listeners just where they can connect with you, where they can find more about what you're doing and whatever it is that you do on the internet.
I have a website. It's just called natureupclose.com. And I don't really do much on the internet, so it's not a great website. But I have my next classes that I'm teaching. I think the only one that's open right now is a California Naturalist course in Cambria in August. I think everything else is full. But you can find out a little bit about me there.
Yeah. And is most of your or all of your education that you do in person?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's no way for people that aren't in California to learn from you.
You can hop on an airplane and fly out and join one of the classes here in person. Yeah. We have this ability. We can do that.
Absolutely.
So no,
absolutely. I just want to clarify, they're all in person in California.
Yeah. I think there might be a couple of online things like bird migrations or something from the Road Scholar sites. I'm sure if you really cared, you could find me online someplace, but I don't on purpose. I have stuff out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Okay. Totally makes sense. I just want to clarify. It's all in person in California. Okay. Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much, Chris, for being here and for sharing your story with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of My Valley, His Victory. If you or someone you know are interested in being on this podcast, please email myvalleyhisvictory@gmail.com.